Samuel sat on the porch of his small homestead, the vast expanse of the colony's dusty landscape stretching out before him. The setting sun cast long shadows, and Samuel's thoughts wandered back to his days as an explorer. Those days were filled with discovery, but also with the painful memories of the injustices he had witnessed across the galaxy. The faces of those he couldn't help still haunted him, their silent pleas echoing in his mind. A notification blinked on the worn-out device on his wrist, snapping him back to the present. An alert about a black market auction caught his eye. Alien girls, young and vulnerable, were being sold off as property. Samuel's jaw tightened. He had seen too much suffering in his life, and the thought of these innocent lives being reduced to commodities fueled a fire in his chest. He made up his mind quickly. He would go to the auction, not to participate, but to save them. The auction was held in a dimly lit underground chamber, far from the prying eyes of the law. Samuel entered quietly, his weathered face hidden beneath a hood. The room was filled with the low murmurs of bidders, most of whom were unsavory characters with cruel intentions. The air was thick with greed and desperation. Samuel scanned the stage, where the girls stood, each from a different alien species, their eyes hollow and devoid of hope. As the auctioneer began the bidding, Samuel's resolve hardened. He raised his hand, placing a bid. Heads turned, curious about the old man who dared to challenge them. The tension in the room grew as the bids increased. A sinister group across the room caught Samuel's attention. They were well-dressed but exuded an air of menace. They, too, were bidding, their intentions clearly vile. Samuel's heart raced. He couldn't let them win. The bidding war intensified, with Samuel pushing the price higher and higher, ignoring the whispers that spread through the crowd. "What's an old man like him going to do with all those girls?" someone sneered. Others speculated, their imaginations running wild. Samuel kept his focus, his mind set on only one thing: freedom for the girls. Finally, the auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack. Samuel had won. The room buzzed with speculation and suspicion as he approached the stage. The girls stared at him with a mix of fear and uncertainty. He could see the mistrust in their eyes, and he didn't blame them. They had no reason to trust anyone after what they had endured. The sinister group lingered, their eyes following Samuel as he completed the transaction. He knew they wouldn't forget his face, but he didn't care. What mattered now was getting the girls to safety. As they left the auction, the alien girls walked behind him, their steps hesitant. Samuel's thoughts turned inward, to the loneliness that had settled into his life like a heavy cloak. He had spent so many years drifting, detached from others, but now, seeing these young lives so close to despair, he felt something stir within him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He glanced back at the girls, offering a small, reassuring smile. They didn't return it, but he wasn't surprised. Trust would take time, and Samuel was willing to wait. For now, all that mattered was that they were free. Samuel moved swiftly, leading the alien girls through the narrow, dark alleys away from the auction house. The sound of distant voices and hurried footsteps echoed behind them, pushing Samuel to quicken his pace. He glanced back, catching the fearful eyes of the girls, and motioned for them to follow closely. The weight of the situation pressed on him. Failure was not an option. They reached the outskirts of the settlement, where the buildings thinned and the landscape turned rugged. Samuel had hidden a small transport vehicle nearby, just in case. As they approached, he could hear the engines of other vehicles roaring in the distance. They were being pursued. With a few quick gestures, he helped the girls into the vehicle, taking the driver's seat and speeding off into the barren wilderness. The ride was tense. Samuel navigated through the rough terrain, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. The distant lights of their pursuers bobbed up and down, growing closer. He took a sharp turn, heading toward the canyon, a natural maze that only those familiar with the land could navigate. The vehicle bounced over rocks and dips, the girls gripping their seats in fear, but they remained silent. Samuel's knuckles whitened on the controls, his mind racing through possible escape routes. Just as the lights of the pursuers seemed too close for comfort, Samuel veered into a narrow crevice, the vehicle barely fitting through. The lights disappeared behind them, and Samuel continued through the winding paths of the canyon until they emerged on the other side, into a vast, open plain. The homestead was still a few hours away, but for now, they were safe. By the time they arrived, dawn was breaking, casting a soft light over Samuel's homestead. The structure was modest, built into the side of a rocky hill, blending seamlessly with its surroundings. As they disembarked, the girls looked around, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and weariness. Samuel led them inside, where the warmth of the interior greeted them, a stark contrast to the cold, barren landscape outside. Samuel offered them food and drink, trying to make them feel at ease. He explained his plan, his voice steady and calm. He wanted to help them find freedom, to give them a chance to live their lives as they wished, far from the clutches of those who sought to exploit them. But the girls remained silent, their eyes betraying their skepticism. Samuel understood their hesitation. They had been lied to and hurt too many times before. Over the next few days, the alien girls began to reveal their true selves. One, with sharp eyes and quick reflexes, took on a defensive stance, watching Samuel's every move with suspicion. Another, curious and observant, started asking questions about the technology in the homestead, marveling at the blend of human and alien designs. Samuel answered patiently, showing them how he had adapted various alien technologies into his home over the years, respecting each culture's uniqueness. Samuel's kindness was unwavering, his patience seemingly endless. Slowly, the girls began to lower their guards, each in their own way. The defensive one softened, offering to help with tasks around the homestead. The curious one became more engaged, spending hours with Samuel learning about different worlds and technologies. Another, who had remained mostly silent, began to open up, sharing her story in broken sentences, her voice trembling with the weight of her past. As the days passed, the bond between Samuel and the girls grew stronger, yet the threat of the sinister group from the auction loomed over them like a dark cloud. Samuel knew they wouldn't give up easily. He prepared for the worst, reinforcing the homestead's defenses, setting up early warning systems, and mapping out escape routes. He had been a survivor for many years, and he intended to keep the girls safe no matter what. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of orange and red, Samuel stood outside, gazing at the landscape. The homestead was quiet, the alien girls resting after another long day. But Samuel's mind was restless. He knew the peace they had found was fragile, and the time for confrontation might come sooner than he wanted. The girls had become more than just individuals he had rescued. They were starting to feel like family, and the thought of losing them to the sinister forces that lurked out there filled Samuel with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He would do whatever it took to protect them, even if it meant facing the darkness of the galaxy once more. The quiet of the homestead was comforting after the harrowing escape. Samuel sat with the alien girls around a small fire, the crackling flames casting flickering shadows on their faces. The tension that had marked their first days together was beginning to lift, replaced by a tentative curiosity. Samuel began sharing stories from his years of exploration, tales of distant worlds and strange creatures. His voice was steady, filled with the nostalgia of a man who had seen much and lost even more. As he spoke, the girls listened intently, their expressions softening. One of them, the curious one who had taken to exploring his technology, asked about a world Samuel had visited long ago. Her eyes sparkled with interest as he described the crystalline forests and the luminescent creatures that dwelled within. It was the first time he saw a genuine smile on her face, and it warmed him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Encouraged by his openness, the girls began to share their own stories. Their voices were hesitant at first, as if testing the waters of trust. The defensive one, who had always kept her distance, spoke of her home world, a place of towering mountains and endless skies. She had been taken from her family at a young age, sold and resold until the concept of home had become a distant memory. Her tone was bitter, but as she spoke, Samuel could see the pain behind her words. Another girl, who had remained silent for the most part, finally found the courage to speak. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper, as she recounted the day her village was raided. She had been the only survivor, hidden away by her mother moments before the attackers stormed their home. The memory was too much, and her voice broke, tears spilling down her cheeks. Without thinking, Samuel reached out, taking her hand in his. She didn't pull away. As the night wore on, more stories were shared, each one peeling back the layers of fear and mistrust that had built up around them. Samuel found himself drawn into their lives, their struggles, and their small triumphs. He realized that they weren't just victims to be rescued, they were individuals, each with a past as complex as his own. His initial plan of freeing them and sending them on their way began to feel inadequate, almost dismissive of the bond that was forming between them. The more they shared, the more Samuel found himself opening up about his own past. He spoke of his late wife, of how she had been his anchor in a life filled with constant motion. He talked about the children they never had, the home they never settled in, and how, after her death, he had wandered the galaxy, searching for something he couldn't name. The girls listened, their earlier wariness replaced by a genuine interest in this man who had saved them, not just from physical harm, but from the abyss of despair. Days turned into weeks, and the homestead became more than just a place of refuge. It became a home, a sanctuary where Samuel and the girls found comfort in each other's company. The defensive one began to trust him, her sharp eyes softening whenever he was near. The curious one, who had been so fascinated by his technology, started working on small projects with him, her enthusiasm infectious. The quiet one, who had been so broken by her past, started to smile more, finding solace in the new family they had all unwittingly formed. Samuel's loneliness, once a constant companion, began to fade. In its place was a sense of belonging he hadn't felt since his wife passed away. The girls filled the void in his life, their presence a reminder that even in the twilight of his years, he still had a purpose. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the moments of laughter, and even the silences that spoke volumes. But as the bond deepened, so did Samuel's internal conflict. He had planned to free the girls, to give them the chance to live their lives as they wished. But now, he wasn't so sure. What if freedom meant loneliness for them as well? What if they were safer, happier with him? The thought of letting them go filled him with a quiet dread. They had become more than just wards, they were his family, and the idea of losing them was unbearable. Yet he knew he couldn't make the decision for them. They had to choose their own paths, just as he had chosen his. But the question of what was best for them gnawed at him, keeping him awake at night. He found himself staring at the ceiling, wondering if he was doing the right thing, or if his own fears were clouding his judgment. The girls seemed to sense his turmoil, and one evening, as they sat together after a long day, the curious one spoke up. "Samuel," she began, her voice steady, "we know you want to help us. But what do you want for yourself?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment, Samuel didn't know how to answer. What did he want? He had been so focused on them, on their needs, that he hadn't stopped to consider his own. Finally, he spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you to be happy, to be free. But I don't want to lose you." The admission felt like a weight lifted off his chest, but it also left him vulnerable, exposed. The girls exchanged glances, and then, one by one, they moved closer to him, their hands reaching out to hold his. It was a silent agreement, an unspoken promise that whatever happened next, they would face it together. In that moment, Samuel realized that freedom wasn't just about letting go. It was about choosing to stay, to fight for the bonds that mattered. And for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. The peaceful morning was shattered by the unmistakable hum of approaching vehicles. Samuel's heart sank as he rushed to the window. The sinister group had found them. He called out to the girls, his voice steady but urgent. They didn't need to ask. They could see the fear in his eyes and knew the time had come. The girls quickly took their positions, each moving with purpose and determination. Samuel's mind raced as he fortified the homestead's defenses, using every trick and piece of technology he had at his disposal. The girls, once so unsure and afraid, now worked alongside him, their faces set with resolve. They had come too far to lose everything now. The first blast hit the outer walls, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Samuel barked orders, guiding the girls as they took cover and prepared to defend their home. The attackers swarmed in, their faces twisted with greed and malice, but they hadn't anticipated the fierce resistance they would meet. Samuel and the girls fought back with everything they had, using their wits and the terrain to their advantage. One of the girls, the one who had been so defensive, proved to be an expert marksman. She picked off attackers with precision, her eyes cold and focused. The curious one used the alien technology she had been studying to create traps that slowed down their enemies, buying them precious time. The quiet one, who had once seemed so fragile, showed a surprising strength, fending off attackers with a makeshift weapon Samuel had taught her to use. The battle raged on, each side refusing to back down. The attackers pressed hard, but Samuel and the girls fought back with a ferocity born of desperation and the need to protect what they had built together. Samuel moved like a man possessed, no longer just a protector but a leader, guiding the girls through the chaos with a calm authority. He knew their strengths, their fears, and he used that knowledge to keep them safe, to keep them fighting. But the attackers were relentless. The homestead's defenses were starting to crumble under the onslaught, and Samuel could see the fear returning to the girls' eyes. They were outnumbered, and the attackers were closing in. For a moment, it seemed like all was lost, that their efforts would be in vain. Then, something shifted. Samuel looked at the girls, saw the determination in their faces, the trust they had placed in him, and something inside him refused to give up. He rallied them, his voice strong and clear, urging them to push forward, to fight for each other. The girls responded, their fear turning into a fierce resolve. They had come too far, endured too much, to be defeated now. With a final push, Samuel and the girls turned the tide. The attackers, caught off guard by the sudden surge of resistance, began to falter. One by one, they fell back, retreating under the relentless assault of Samuel and the girls. The homestead, battered and bruised, held strong. As the last of the attackers fled into the distance, a heavy silence fell over the homestead. Samuel and the girls stood among the wreckage, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The battle was over, but the reality of what they had just survived was only beginning to sink in. They had won, but it had come at a cost. Samuel looked at the girls, his heart swelling with pride and relief. They had fought like warriors, each one showing a strength and courage that belied their past traumas. They had trusted him, followed him into battle, and together, they had emerged victorious. But more than that, they had become a true family, bound not by blood but by the trials they had faced together. The adrenaline began to fade, and the exhaustion set in. The girls moved closer to Samuel, their eyes reflecting the mix of emotions they all felt: relief, pride, and a lingering fear of what might come next. Samuel put his arms around them, pulling them close. They had faced death together, and had come out the other side stronger than ever. In that moment, Samuel realized just how much these girls meant to him. They weren't just wards to be protected or victims to be freed. They were his family, and he would do anything to keep them safe. The bond they had formed in the heat of battle was unbreakable, and Samuel knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The homestead was damaged, but it still stood, just like them. They would rebuild, stronger than before, with the knowledge that they could survive anything as long as they had each other. The attack had been a test, one that had forged them into something more than just survivors. They were a family, and nothing could tear them apart now. The morning after the battle was quiet, almost eerily so. Samuel and the girls moved through the homestead, surveying the damage, patching up what they could. The tension of the previous day had melted away, leaving behind a calm that felt both comforting and strange. They had survived, but now, the question of what came next loomed over them. As they sat together, exhaustion finally catching up with them, Samuel knew it was time to address the uncertainty. He looked at the girls, each one of them worn out but resilient, and he felt a deep surge of affection. They had become more than just companions, they were his family, and the thought of losing them now was unbearable. Clearing his throat, Samuel began to speak, his voice steady but laced with emotion. He told them how much they meant to him, how their presence had filled the void in his life that had existed since his wife's death. He confessed that his original plan to free them, to send them off to start new lives, now felt hollow. He didn't want to let them go. Instead, he wanted them to stay, to build a life together, not as captor and captives, but as a family. The girls listened in silence, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, Samuel feared he had said too much, that he had overstepped. But then, one by one, they began to speak. The quiet one, who had once been so reserved, was the first to break the silence. She admitted that she had never known what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be truly safe, until she met Samuel. Her voice shook as she said that the idea of leaving now, of facing the world alone, terrified her. The curious one spoke next, her tone thoughtful. She had always dreamed of freedom, of exploring the galaxy and discovering new technologies. But now, she realized that freedom wasn't just about wandering the stars. It was about having a place to call home, people who cared about you. She didn't want to lose that. The defensive one, who had been the most guarded, took a deep breath before speaking. She admitted that she had spent so much of her life fighting, always on edge, always expecting the worst. But here, with Samuel and the others, she had found something she never thought she would: peace. The thought of leaving that behind felt like a betrayal of everything they had fought for. Samuel felt his heart swell with each word, each confession. He could see it in their eyes. They felt the same way he did. They didn't want to leave. They wanted to stay, to build something together, something real and lasting. And in that moment, Samuel knew that he had made the right decision. But not all of the girls felt the same. One of them, who had remained more distant, spoke up with a different perspective. She had dreams of her own, dreams that didn't include staying in one place. She thanked Samuel for everything he had done, for giving her a chance to reclaim her life. But she needed to find her own path, to see what the galaxy had in store for her. Samuel nodded, understanding her need for independence, even as it pained him to see her go. The decision was made. Some would stay, some would leave, but there was no bitterness, no regret. Each girl had found something with Samuel, something that had changed them, but they were free to choose their own destinies. Those who stayed would do so as equals, partners in whatever future they would build together. The day the first girl left was bittersweet. They gathered to see her off, each one offering words of encouragement and farewell. Samuel hugged her tightly, whispering that she would always have a place here, no matter where her journey took her. She smiled, a genuine smile that held both sadness and hope, and then she was gone, a speck on the horizon as she ventured into the unknown. For those who stayed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The homestead was repaired, and the daily routines became less about survival and more about living. The bond between Samuel and the girls deepened, evolving into something unbreakable. They were no longer just survivors thrown together by circumstance. They were a family, bound by choice and love. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the sense of peace that had been so elusive for all of them finally took root. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty didn't feel daunting. It felt full of possibility. In the evenings, they would gather together, sharing stories, dreams, and plans for what lay ahead. Samuel found himself laughing more, feeling lighter than he had in years. The loneliness that had once been his constant companion was gone, replaced by the warmth of companionship and the comfort of knowing he wasn't alone anymore. As the sun set on another day, Samuel looked out over the horizon, the girls by his side. He felt a deep sense of contentment, knowing that they had chosen this life, chosen each other. Whatever challenges came next, they would face them together, stronger for the battles they had already won. The story that had begun with a rescue mission had transformed into something much more, a story of love, of trust, and of the power of choosing your own family. And as they stood together, watching the stars come out one by one, Samuel knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope and endless possibilities.